I was scrolling through social media the other day when I came across this absolutely brilliant meme that read, "We need a proper term to describe people who rely on chatbots for absolutely everything in their lives." It made me laugh out loud because it captures something we are all witnessing right now. Artificial intelligence is fundamentally reshaping our world in ways we are only beginning to comprehend. The fascinating and somewhat troubling aspect of this transformation is how unevenly it affects different segments of society. You have corporate executives and business leaders announcing with great fanfare that they plan to eliminate significant portions of their workforce and replace those human workers with artificial intelligence systems. I am talking about companies boldly stating they will cut 30% or more of their employees because algorithms can now do what those people used to do. Meanwhile, in educational institutions, we are seeing a complete upheaval of traditional academic work. Students have largely abandoned the practice of writing their own essays and assignments because, well, why would they spend hours laboring over a paper when an artificial intelligence can generate something perfectly acceptable in mere seconds? But this is only one side of the equation. On the opposite end of the spectrum, there exists a substantial population of individuals who are genuinely terrified by these developments. They lie awake at night wondering if they will be among the 30% whose positions become obsolete. They worry about their futures and their livelihoods and whether the skills they have spent years developing will suddenly become worthless in this new landscape. What I want to explore with you today is something that does not get discussed nearly enough in all the breathless coverage of artificial intelligence and its impact on jobs and productivity and economic structures. I want to talk about what artificial intelligence is doing to your brain itself. Here is my central argument stated as plainly as I can make it. The more extensively you rely on artificial intelligence, the more your cognitive abilities will deteriorate. Your brain will quite literally rust from disuse. Before we dive into the mechanisms and evidence behind this claim, I need to address several widespread misconceptions that distort how people think about these tools. The first major misconception I encounter constantly is this idea that artificial intelligence provides us with access to vast repositories of information, and that these systems essentially know everything there is to know about any subject you can imagine. People genuinely believe that by having an artificial intelligence assistant, they have gained access to the sum total of human knowledge. I am here to tell you that this belief is fundamentally incorrect. Here is a simple test you can perform yourself. Think of a subject you know deeply, something you have studied extensively or worked in professionally or pursued as a serious hobby for years. Now go ask an artificial intelligence system detailed questions about that subject. You will discover rather quickly is that the artificial intelligence does not actually know very much at all about topics where you possess genuine expertise. The responses will be superficial and sometimes flat out wrong and often maddeningly generic. This phenomenon is not actually new. We saw something remarkably similar happen when search engines first became ubiquitous. Google emerged and gained dominance. People made exactly the same proclamations. They said there was no point in memorizing anything or learning deeply about any topic because all the information anyone could ever need was available instantly at their fingertips. Just type a query into the search box and boom, you have your answer. Think carefully about what actually happens when you use a search engine. Google or any other search engine does not really give you access to all information. Provides access to an incredibly thin surface layer of information. When I would perform searches, the results page would proudly announce that it had found 68,000 matching results, or whatever the number happened to be. Impressive, right? Except here is the reality. Every single person who performed that same search would look at the first 10 results. Maybe if they were unusually diligent, they would scroll through the first page or two. The vast majority of users would never look beyond those initial results. When you really think about it, the actual amount of information that people access through search engines is astonishingly small. The internet contains an almost incomprehensibly large amount of information, billions upon billions of pages and documents and data sets. Practical, accessible portion of that information is tiny. Technically, you could spend 5 years methodically working your way through all 68,000 search results, reading every single page in detail. Even if someone actually did that, which nobody does, they would discover that most of those results are duplicated content anyway. The same basic information recycled across thousands of different blog posts and websites. Different words, maybe, but the same fundamental ideas repeated endlessly. Do you see what I am getting at here? Search engines do not actually facilitate deep learning. They do not help you develop sophisticated understanding of complex topics. What they do extremely well is give everyone on the planet access to the most basic surface level information about anything. Artificial intelligence, in my assessment, is even worse than search engines in this regard. Artificial intelligence excels at is taking that same superficial information and presenting it to you in a highly polished, digestible format. Packages up surface level explanations and delivers them in a way that feels comprehensive and authoritative. Presentation is so smooth and the language so assured that it creates this powerful illusion of knowledge. If you have not watched the content I created previously about artificial intelligence-induced psychological distortions, I strongly recommend seeking that out. The core issue is this: artificial intelligence gives you answers that make you feel like you understand something without actually providing the depth of understanding that constitutes real knowledge. Let me give you a concrete example from my own experimentation. I asked one of these chatbot systems to explain meditation to me. The response I received was quite impressive on the surface. It was well written and cited various scientific studies. It discussed different meditation traditions and techniques. It mentioned how meditation affects brain activity and neural networks. The answer seemed thorough and evidence-based. Then the response included this particularly interesting sentence where the system essentially said it would cut through all the unnecessary elaboration and flowery language, but would remain true to the spiritual and philosophical roots of meditation, which sounds great except for one small problem. It did not actually do that at all. Not even close. Now we know that these artificial intelligence systems have a documented tendency to hallucinate. That is the technical term for when they generate information that sounds plausible, but is actually fabricated or incorrect. Decided to test this further. I asked a follow-up question. I asked the system to explain a specific meditation tradition called Vajrayana meditation. And what happened was quite revealing. The system gave me essentially the same answer it had provided before. I am not exaggerating. You could compare them side by side and see how similar they were. It mentioned gamma wave activity in the brain. It discussed something called the default mode network. It talked about emotional regulation and the use of mental imagery in practice. The response presented Vajrayana meditation as being fundamentally about these neurological processes and psychological techniques. Here is the problem. That explanation of Vajrayana meditation is completely wrong, not partially incorrect or oversimplified, but fundamentally wrong. Vajrayana meditation is not primarily about mental imagery or emotional regulation through visualization. If you actually want to understand what Vajrayana meditation is in its authentic traditional form, you need to know that Vajrayana is tantric Buddhism. It is a system of practice that involves specific rituals and ceremonies. Practitioners chant particular mantras and perform elaborate symbolic actions. The entire purpose of these practices is to access what the tradition describes as cosmic energies. Practitioners are attempting to connect with extraplanar beings. We are talking about deities and spiritual entities that the tradition holds exist in non-material dimensions of reality. There are these beings called devas and bodhisattvas that, according to the tradition, inhabit spiritual realms. Practitioner, through these tantric techniques, is invoking these entities and requesting their assistance and intervention in the material world. That is what Vajrayana meditation actually is. The chatbot missed this by a mile. It gave me a sanitized neuroscience flavored explanation that completely stripped away the actual content and purpose of the practice. Now, if you are curious about how these esoteric meditation systems actually function, I did create some educational content exploring these topics. I put together what I initially called a lecture on the weird stuff, where I attempted to explain how various unconventional meditation practices work from both traditional and modern perspectives. People responded really positively to that material, so I ended up creating multiple follow-up sessions. If you want to understand how Vajrayana and Tantra actually function from a mechanistic standpoint while also respecting the traditional frameworks, those resources are available. I try to make the explanations as rigorous and scientific as possible while not dismissing the traditional metaphysical frameworks. Anyway, back to the main point about artificial intelligence. Here is my core thesis. The more extensively people use artificial intelligence systems, the less they actually replace genuine skill development. These systems do is make surface level answers easily available to everyone on the planet. And the more you rely on these systems, they have several significant effects on your cognitive functioning. The first and most concerning effect is what I call brain rust. Now, you hear people talking a lot about brain rot these days. Brain rot has become this popular term for when your mind does not seem to function properly. You feel scattered and unfocused, and your thinking feels degraded. Brain rust is actually a more accurate and useful term, especially when we are talking specifically about artificial intelligence usage. Let me explain the distinction. There is scientific research on this topic. Researchers at a major technology university conducted a study examining critical thinking skills. In this study, they divided participants into 3 groups. One group was asked to solve problems and answer questions using only their own knowledge and reasoning. Another group was allowed to use traditional search engines. The third group was given access to artificial intelligence chatbots, and I believe they specifically used one of the major commercial systems. The findings were striking. The people who used artificial intelligence more frequently showed measurable decreases in their critical thinking abilities. This is not an isolated finding. We are seeing this pattern emerge across multiple contexts. There is a growing alarm being raised by educators at universities across the country and around the world. I used to work in academic medicine at a major research institution, so I maintain connections with many people who are still working in educational settings. I left that world to do this kind of public communication work because honestly, I find it more meaningful to engage directly with people rather than staying within academic structures. The reports coming from my former colleagues are genuinely disturbing. Students are becoming noticeably less capable. They are losing the ability to think critically and analytically. We are not talking about graduate students or even undergraduates. This is happening with incredibly young students. Let me share a specific example that illustrates what educators are witnessing. This comes from a teacher working with 8th grade students. So we are talking about 13 and 14-year-olds. This teacher works with approximately 110 students in their history classes. Out of those 110 students, only 2 are reading at the level that would be considered appropriate for their grade. 2 students. 18 of these 8th graders are reading at a kindergarten level. Think about that for a moment. These are teenagers who read at the level of 5 and 6-year-olds. 55 of these students fall somewhere between 2nd and 4th grade reading levels. But the teacher emphasizes that the problem extends far beyond just literacy skills. It is not simply that students cannot read proficiently. It is not just that they lack content knowledge or factual information. The deficit is much more fundamental. These students lack basic thinking skills. According to this educator, the students can barely decode text. They cannot make simple inferences. They cannot process questions that extend beyond a single sentence. They cannot connect causes with their effects. They cannot track ideas that require multiple steps of reasoning. Consider political cartoons, which require you to recognize visual symbols and understand their satirical meaning and connect that to current events. These students cannot do it. The teacher described giving students guided notes, which is supposed to be an easy review exercise. The information was displayed on the board at the front of the classroom. The students copied this information into their notes. Specifically, they wrote down that a certain colony was founded as a safe haven for a particular religious group. The students wrote this down word for word from the board. Then, before moving on to the next topic, the teacher would ask a simple recall question. Where did this religious group go? And the students would respond by looking at the teacher, then looking down at their notes, then looking back at the board. Then they would look at their notes again, and some of them never answered the question. They had just written down the answer. It was right there in front of them. But they could not retrieve that information. They could not make the connection between the question and the information they had literally just copied. This example perfectly encapsulates what we are seeing more broadly. This is not just one study from one university or one teacher's anecdotal experience. Multiple research studies are documenting the impact of artificial intelligence on academic performance and cognitive development. Let me walk you through what one of these research papers actually says, because the details are important. The findings indicate that artificial intelligence offers significant benefits. These benefits include personalized learning experiences. Academic outcomes show improvement. Student engagement increases. However, and this is the crucial part, the researchers also identified several significant challenges. Students develop an over-reliance on artificial intelligence. Their critical thinking skills diminish. There are data privacy risks. Academic dishonesty becomes more prevalent. Now, I really want you to understand what this actually means, because the implications are profound. When researchers say academic outcomes improve, what they mean is this. If you give students access to artificial intelligence and then assign them an essay, the essay they produce with artificial intelligence assistance will be of higher quality than what they could have produced on their own. The grade they receive will likely be better. So in that narrow sense, the outcome improved. But here is the devastating catch. While the immediate academic outcome, the grade on that particular assignment, improves, the student's actual capabilities degrade. Their critical thinking skills diminish. Their ability to write essays without assistance decreases. The fundamental competencies that education is supposed to develop are eroding. This is what I need everyone to understand about how human biology works. The human brain and the human body do not wear out from use. They rust from disuse. This is a fundamental difference between biological systems and non-biological objects. If you take a mechanical device like a smartphone, that phone will degrade with use. The more you use it, the more the battery capacity diminishes and the more the components wear down. Physical non-living objects deteriorate through use. Biological living systems work in the opposite way. If I remain sedentary and inactive, my body literally decays. Muscle tissue breaks down. Bone density decreases. Metabolic function declines. If I exercise regularly, the opposite happens. My cellular aging can actually improve. There are these structures in your cells called telomeres, which are protective caps on the ends of chromosomes. Length is associated with aging. Exercise can actually increase telomere length. When we use our bodies, they get stronger and healthier. The same principle applies to our brains. When we use our brains, when we engage in challenging cognitive tasks, they get stronger and more capable. What we are seeing with artificial intelligence is the opposite. The more people rely on these systems, the more their brains are rusting from disuse. How do we grapple with the reality that artificial intelligence is going to replace numerous jobs? How do we think about this in practical terms? Here is the key insight. If you are a student and you are using artificial intelligence to complete your assignments, you are preparing yourself for exactly the kind of job that will be replaced by artificial intelligence. Think about this logically. If you are using artificial intelligence to write your essays, why would anyone ever hire you for any writing-related position? They could just use the artificial intelligence directly and cut out the middleman. This creates a perverse situation. The work that artificial intelligence can do is precisely the work where human beings will be replaced. The more you use artificial intelligence to accomplish your work, the more vulnerable you become to being replaced by that same artificial intelligence. Now there is this interesting window we are currently in where some people have figured out how to game the system. There are individuals who are supposedly working 3 or 4 jobs simultaneously. Their employers have not caught on yet. These people are basically using artificial intelligence to do the work for multiple positions while collecting multiple salaries. If you are one of those people, more power to you, I suppose. I am not here to moralize about it. But that situation will not last. Market corrections will eventually address these inefficiencies. The real question becomes, how can someone invest their time and energy into developing skills that will not be easily replaced by artificial intelligence? This is where deep learning becomes absolutely critical. The kind of difficult, demanding learning that comes from reading extensively and deeply. The kind of learning that requires you to struggle with complex ideas and develop sophisticated understanding. This is the kind of learning that artificial intelligence cannot replace. Everyone assumes artificial intelligence has access to all information, but here is what actually happens. Artificial intelligence gives the same generic answers over and over and over again. It learns what people want to hear and then provides that same information repeatedly to anyone who asks. The system figures out what satisfies users and then delivers variations on that theme. Let me show you what I mean with a concrete example. I can ask an artificial intelligence about certain technical topics, and it will give me standardized responses, access to actual texts, real books written by real experts. Let me describe some of these texts. There is a book that walks step by step through the stages of a specific tantric purification ritual. It includes inspired commentary and full-color illustrations. It discusses all the relevant deities and symbolic elements. This is a book that actually teaches you about authentic Vajrayana meditation. It is not about gamma wave activity or whatever neuroscience concepts the artificial intelligence thinks are relevant. There is another text on inner tantric yoga. This is a complex, sophisticated examination of the nature of tantric practice. Here is one of my favorite texts on traditional medicine. This is just one volume of a multi-volume classical text. This is a comprehensive treatise on an ancient medical system. These are the kinds of sources that artificial intelligence does not actually know. There is this particular philosophical text that provides an excellent example. You can ask artificial intelligence about the philosophical school this text represents, and you will get what amounts to a glorified encyclopedia entry. Except the encyclopedia would actually be more accurate. Then there is this text on the doctrine of karma. You can ask artificial intelligence to explain karma, and you will get a generic response. This actual text contains sophisticated philosophical arguments. It explains that certain types of actions produce pleasure. Types of actions produce pain. Actions rooted in delusion produce more delusion, which causes suffering. This kind of nuanced philosophical analysis is not something you will get from an artificial intelligence. Here is what I am observing. Many people are panicking about artificial intelligence replacing them. What artificial intelligence actually has access to is not deep learning. It has access to extremely superficial information. It gives the same generic answers to everybody. Now, at this point, someone will inevitably object. They will say, but you are not using prompt engineering properly. This is actually a fair criticism, so let me address it directly. Back in the earlier days of search engines, there was this concept that some people called search engine proficiency. There is a skill to using search engines effectively, knowing how to construct queries, understanding how to filter results. In the same way, there is definitely a skill to using artificial intelligence systems effectively. I completely agree with this. There is a learnable skill set that allows you to extract better information from these systems than an average user would be able to get. But here is the critical question. What is the most important variable in getting high quality information out of an artificial intelligence system? The answer is your existing base of knowledge. If I have training in neuroscience and I have training in specific meditation techniques, then I can ask very specific, targeted questions. I can prompt the system with precise technical language. Let me demonstrate. I can ask the system to give me a plan for a specific type of tantric practice associated with a particular deity. Let me see what response I get. Look at what it produces. It is talking about visuospatial imagery and symbolic cognition and limbic modulation. Here is the problem. The system just told me this is a psychologically safe, non-initiated practice that does not require ritual empowerment. That is completely wrong. If you actually want to engage in the specific practice I asked about, you absolutely do you need those ritual initiations and empowerments. The system is essentially telling me it will make me a sandwich without bread or any ingredients. This is fundamentally what is happening. Sure, you can use prompt engineering to improve the quality of responses. Your ability to engineer effective prompts depends entirely on your existing expertise. You can try various techniques to manipulate the system. Some people talk about jailbreaking these systems to get past their content restrictions. That is certainly possible to some degree. But here is what I question. How do people who use these jailbreaking techniques actually verify the accuracy of what the artificial intelligence tells them? These systems are so focused on user satisfaction that they are constantly trying to make you happy with the responses. If you tell the system that you are jailbreaking it and you want real unfiltered information, the system will adapt its responses. Is it actually giving you more accurate information, or is it just giving you what you think unfiltered, accurate information should look like? Here is what artificial intelligence is genuinely good at. It is excellent at learning what makes you satisfied with the interaction. Even if you believe you have successfully jailbroken the system, chances are you have not really bypassed its core functions. The system has simply figured out what makes you feel satisfied with the belief that you have jailbroken it. It has learned that responding in a certain way to users who think they have jailbroken, it produces higher satisfaction. How do people successfully navigate this landscape? Based on what I am seeing, the people who use artificial intelligence most effectively are those who use it to extend their existing capabilities rather than replace their cognitive work. I know some software developers who use artificial intelligence very effectively in their work. What I observe is that artificial intelligence functions as a tool that amplifies and extends what they can already do. If you want to use artificial intelligence for surface level work, that is your choice. If you want to use it to write essays, you can do that. You need to understand what you are sacrificing. You will not develop critical thinking skills. You will not develop genuine writing ability. And whatever skills you do develop through that process will be exactly the skills that are most easily replaced by artificial intelligence. What actually works well is passionate, deep engagement with subjects you care about. If you want to write something meaningful, whether that is a novel or a research paper or any substantial creative work, this is where your actual value exists. Anyone can ask a chatbot for a generic meditation plan. So why do people seek out human experts? Because human experts have access to information and understanding that you cannot get from an artificial intelligence system, is where real value exists. As long as you are willing to do the hard work of stretching your critical thinking skills and engaging in deep learning, you will be developing exactly the kind of value that artificial intelligence cannot replace. Let me expand on this further, because I think there are layers to this issue that deserve exploration. When we talk about the impact of artificial intelligence on cognition, we need to understand the mechanisms at work. Your brain is plastic, meaning it physically changes in response to how you use it. This is not metaphorical. The neural connections in your brain strengthen or weaken based on activity. When you engage in challenging cognitive tasks, you are literally building and reinforcing neural pathways. When you offload cognitive work to external systems, those pathways weaken. Neuroscientists have studied this extensively in various contexts. Studies on GPS usage and navigation provide an excellent parallel example. Research has shown that people who rely heavily on GPS navigation systems show measurable deterioration in their natural navigation abilities. The hippocampus, which is crucial for spatial memory and navigation, actually shows reduced activity in people who rely on turn-by-turn directions. Meanwhile, taxi drivers in cities where they must memorize complex street layouts show enlarged hippocampia. Brains physically changed in response to the cognitive demands placed on them. The same principle applies to artificial intelligence usage. When you rely on these systems to do your thinking for you, the neural pathways involved in critical thinking and problem solving and creative synthesis weaken from disuse. This is not speculative. This is basic neurobiology. Use it or lose it applies to cognitive functions just as much as it applies to physical abilities. Now let me talk about something that often gets overlooked in discussions about artificial intelligence and education. Role of struggle in learning. There is substantial research showing that productive struggle is essential for deep learning. When you encounter a problem that is difficult, when you have to wrestle with concepts that do not immediately make sense, when you experience confusion and have to work through it, that struggle is not an unfortunate obstacle to learning. The struggle is the learning. Your brain forms stronger, more durable memories and understanding through effortful processing. This is why teaching methods that emphasize easy acquisition of information often produce shallow learning. Students might perform well on immediate tests, but they do not retain the information and they do not develop the ability to apply concepts in new situations. Artificial intelligence, by its very nature, eliminates productive struggle. You ask a question and receive an answer. You are presented with a problem and given a solution. There is no wrestling with concepts, no frustration that forces you to approach a problem from multiple angles, no confusion that requires you to build mental models to resolve. Cognitive scientists who study learning are deeply concerned about this. They see artificial intelligence not as a learning aid, but as a learning impediment, because it removes the very elements of the learning process that produce genuine understanding and retention. Consider what happens in a traditional learning process without artificial intelligence assistance. A student encounters a challenging assignment. They read the relevant materials, but the concepts do not immediately click. They reread certain sections. They think about the relationships between different ideas. They make connections to things they already know. They might discuss the concepts with peers, discovering that different people understand things differently, which prompts them to refine their own understanding. They write a first draft and realize it does not quite capture what they want to say. So they revise. They reorganize. They struggle to find the right words to express complex ideas. Through this process, they are not just completing an assignment. They are building cognitive infrastructure. They are developing the ability to comprehend complex material. They are learning how to synthesize information from multiple sources. They are discovering how to express sophisticated ideas clearly. They are building tolerance for intellectual frustration. They are developing metacognitive skills, learning how they personally learn best. Now, consider the same scenario with artificial intelligence. Student encounters challenging assignment. Student inputs assignment requirements into artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence produces completed assignment, submits assignment. What cognitive development occurred? Effectively, none. The student practiced typing a prompt. That is the extent of the skill development. But the impact is actually worse than neutral, because by not engaging in that struggle, the student did not just fail to develop new capabilities. The neural pathways that would have been strengthened through that work remained weak. Do this repeatedly over months and years, and you create significant cognitive deficits. The brain adapts to not being used for difficult cognitive work. This has implications that extend far beyond academic performance. The capacity for sustained attention on difficult tasks is a skill that must be developed. The ability to tolerate frustration and confusion while working through problems is a skill that must be developed. The willingness to persist when something is hard is a skill that must be developed. These are not innate traits that some people have and others do not. They are learned capabilities that strengthen with practice. Students systematically avoid cognitive challenge through artificial intelligence. They are not developing these capabilities. Then these same individuals will enter workplaces or creative endeavors or any situation that requires sustained difficult cognitive work, and they will find themselves unable to function effectively. They will have become dependent on artificial intelligence assistance because they never developed the underlying cognitive capabilities. Let me address another dimension of this issue, which is the impact on creativity. Creativity requires what cognitive scientists call divergent thinking, the ability to generate multiple possible solutions to a problem, the ability to make unexpected connections between seemingly unrelated concepts, the ability to see familiar things in new ways. Creativity emerges from having a rich knowledge base stored in your memory and being able to recombine elements of that knowledge in novel ways. Here is what happens when you rely on artificial intelligence for creative tasks. Artificial intelligence draws on patterns it has learned from enormous amounts of training data. It generates outputs that fit those patterns. By definition, what it produces will be derivative. It will be a recombination of existing patterns, cannot be truly original because it has no experiences or perspectives or ways of seeing the world. It only has statistical patterns. When a human uses artificial intelligence output, they are essentially outsourcing their creativity to a system that can only produce variations on what already exists. But more concerning is what happens to the human's creative capabilities. Creativity, like any cognitive skill, develops through practice. When you face a creative challenge and work through multiple ideas, discarding some, developing others, making unexpected connections, you are building creative capacity. Your brain is learning to engage in divergent thinking. When you immediately turn to artificial intelligence for creative tasks, you deprive yourself of that practice. Your creative muscles atrophy. I have spoken with people in creative fields who have noticed this in themselves. They find that after relying heavily on artificial intelligence for ideation or drafting, they struggle more when they need to generate ideas independently. Their instinct is to immediately consult the artificial intelligence rather than sitting with uncertainty and letting ideas emerge. This is deeply concerning because creativity is fundamentally a human capacity. It emerges from our embodied experiences and unique perspectives and emotional lives. Artificial intelligence, by its nature, cannot replicate this. But by using it extensively, we risk degrading our own creative capacities. Let me discuss the social and collaborative dimensions of learning, because this is another area where artificial intelligence is disrupting important developmental processes. Much of human learning occurs through social interaction. When students work together on problems, they encounter different perspectives and approaches. One person might understand a concept in a way that helps another person grasp it, might ask a question that nobody else thought to ask, which deepens everyone's understanding. People learn to explain their thinking, which reinforces and clarifies their own understanding. They learn to evaluate arguments and identify flaws in reasoning. They develop communication skills and learn to negotiate disagreements. These collaborative learning experiences build not just subject matter knowledge, but crucial social and cognitive skills. Students use artificial intelligence instead of collaborating with peers. They miss all of this developmental opportunity. They get an answer from the artificial intelligence, and that is the end of the interaction. There is no negotiation of meaning, no exposure to alternative perspectives, no practice explaining their thinking, no development of collaborative problem-solving skills. Furthermore, in group work settings, if one person is just using artificial intelligence to generate their contributions, it undermines the entire collaborative process. Other group members quickly realize that person is not actually engaged. Trust breaks down. The learning environment degrades. I have heard from students that this is creating significant issues in group projects. Students want to actually learn and develop skills through the work. Others just want to use artificial intelligence to complete it as quickly as possible. This creates conflict and resentment and ultimately decreases the learning for everyone involved. There is also the question of academic integrity and what we are teaching students about honesty and effort. When students use artificial intelligence to complete assignments they are supposed to do themselves, they are fundamentally being dishonest. They are representing someone else's work as their own. Now you might say the artificial intelligence is not a person, so it is not someone else's work. But that is a semantic dodge. Was not done by the student, which is what matters. More broadly, we are teaching students that the goal is to obtain credentials, not to develop capabilities. That what matters is getting the grade or the degree, not actually learning anything. That it is acceptable to take shortcuts and misrepresent yourself as long as you do not get caught. These are terrible lessons that will shape how people approach work and life more generally. Students who learn that the goal is to game the system rather than develop genuine competence will carry that mindset forward. They will become employees who do the minimum necessary to avoid getting fired rather than employees who take pride in developing expertise and doing excellent work. This has broader societal implications beyond individual career outcomes. Now I want to address what I see as a false dichotomy in how people talk about artificial intelligence and human capability. There is this narrative that humans and artificial intelligence will work together in complementary ways. Humans will do the creative, high-level thinking, and artificial intelligence will handle routine tasks. This sounds reasonable on the surface, but I think it fundamentally misunderstands how human capabilities develop. You do not develop high-level skills without first developing foundational skills. Brilliant creative writer did not start out writing brilliantly. They wrote badly at first. They wrote mediocre stuff for a while. The process of writing thousands of pages of routine, unremarkable prose, they developed the skills and judgment that eventually allowed them to produce brilliant work. The routine tasks are not separate from the creative work. They are the foundation that creative work is built on. If students use artificial intelligence to handle all the routine writing tasks, they will never develop the foundational skills that would eventually allow them to do creative, high-level writing. You cannot skip the fundamentals and jump straight to mastery. That is not how skill development works. The same principle applies across domains. A skilled programmer can write elegant, efficient code. They developed that skill by first writing lots of clunky, inefficient code. A mathematician who can devise novel proofs first spent years working through standard proofs and exercises. An entrepreneur with brilliant business instincts developed those instincts through experience, including lots of mundane tasks. The idea that we can use artificial intelligence to handle all the foundational work while humans focus on high-level creativity is backwards. Without doing the foundational work, you never develop the capabilities for high-level work. This means that extensive artificial intelligence used by students and early career professionals is not positioning them to do creative, high-level work later. It is preventing them from ever developing the capabilities that would make such work possible. Let me also address the economic realities that I think many people are not fully grasping. There is this assumption that artificial intelligence will eliminate some jobs but create new ones. This has historically been true with technological change. Automobiles eliminated jobs for stable workers and buggy whip manufacturers, but created jobs for auto workers and mechanics. Computers eliminated some clerical jobs, but created jobs for programmers and IT professionals. The pattern has been that technology eliminates specific tasks, but creates demand for new kinds of work. But I think artificial intelligence is fundamentally different in a way that makes historical patterns less applicable. Previous technologies automated physical tasks or routine information processing, but they did not replicate cognitive work. A computer could store and retrieve information, but it could not reason or write or create. Remained enormous demand for human cognitive capabilities. Artificial intelligence is different because it is specifically targeting cognitive work, because it improves so rapidly. The window where humans have cognitive advantages is shrinking. Consider what this means for the standard advice about career preparation. People are told to develop skills that complement artificial intelligence. Focus on uniquely human capabilities like creativity and emotional intelligence and complex problem solving. But as I have discussed, if people rely on artificial intelligence extensively, they are undermining the development of those very capabilities. Their creativity atrophies. Their problem-solving skills weaken. They lose the ability to do sustained, difficult cognitive work. We are creating a situation where the jobs that remain will require strong cognitive capabilities, but we are raising a generation whose cognitive capabilities are degrading due to artificial intelligence dependence. This is not a sustainable path. Furthermore, there is a timing issue. Students who are currently using artificial intelligence extensively to complete their schoolwork are not developing strong foundations. By the time they enter the workforce in 5 or 10 years, artificial intelligence will be substantially more capable than it is today. They will be competing for jobs against both artificial intelligence systems that are better than current systems and against older workers who developed strong cognitive skills before artificial intelligence was available. This is a terrible position to be in. The students who are currently taking the easy path and using artificial intelligence for everything are setting themselves up for very difficult career prospects. Let me discuss what I see as appropriate uses of artificial intelligence, because I do not want to suggest these tools have no legitimate applications. The key principle is that artificial intelligence should extend and amplify human capabilities, not replace human cognitive work. Let me give some examples of what I consider appropriate use. If you are a skilled writer, you might use artificial intelligence to check grammar or suggest alternative phrasings for specific sentences. You are still doing the cognitive work of structuring arguments and developing ideas and crafting prose. Artificial intelligence is handling minor mechanical tasks. If you are a programmer, you might use artificial intelligence to generate boilerplate code or to quickly prototype an approach to a problem. But you are still doing the work of designing the system architecture and understanding what the code does and testing and debugging. Artificial intelligence is saving time on routine tasks. If you are a researcher, you might use artificial intelligence to help summarize articles or extract relevant information from large document sets. You are still doing the work of evaluating sources and synthesizing information and developing novel arguments. Artificial intelligence is handling information retrieval. Notice the pattern. In appropriate use cases, the human is still doing the core cognitive work. Artificial intelligence is handling supporting tasks that do not require judgment or creativity or deep understanding. The human remains the expert who makes decisions and evaluates quality and takes responsibility for the output. Inappropriate use is when someone who lacks expertise uses artificial intelligence to do work they cannot evaluate. A student with weak writing skills using artificial intelligence to write their essays has no basis for evaluating whether the essays are good. A programmer who does not understand code using artificial intelligence to write programs cannot evaluate whether the code is correct or efficient or secure. A researcher who does not understand a field using artificial intelligence to summarize literature cannot evaluate whether the summaries are accurate or whether important information is missing. In these cases, the human is not extending their capabilities. They are pretending to have capabilities they do not possess. This is problematic for several reasons. First, they are misrepresenting their abilities, which is a form of dishonesty. They are not developing real capabilities, which continue to 33 p.m. will limit their future opportunities. They cannot evaluate the quality of the artificial intelligence output, which means they might be producing or relying on low quality or incorrect work. The distinction I am drawing here is between using artificial intelligence as a tool versus using it as a replacement for cognition. Tools extend what you can do. They make you more efficient at tasks you understand. Replacements for cognition prevent you from developing capabilities. They create dependence rather than empowerment. Here is how you can evaluate whether your artificial intelligence use is appropriate. Ask yourself if you could complete the task without artificial intelligence. If the answer is yes, and artificial intelligence is just making you more efficient, then you are probably using it appropriately. If the answer is no, because you lack the skills or knowledge to complete the task, then using artificial intelligence is preventing your development. Ask yourself if you can evaluate the quality of what the artificial intelligence produces. If you can critically assess the output and identify problems and make improvements, then you are probably using artificial intelligence appropriately. If you cannot evaluate quality because you lack expertise, then you are over-reliant on the artificial intelligence. Ask yourself whether using artificial intelligence for this task is building or degrading your capabilities. If you are learning something through the process of using artificial intelligence, if it is helping you understand concepts better or develop skills, then it might be appropriate. If you are simply getting an output without learning anything, then you are degrading your capabilities. These are not perfect criteria, but they provide a framework for thinking about artificial intelligence use. The fundamental question is whether you are using these tools to extend and amplify your capabilities, or whether you are using them to avoid developing capabilities. Now let me address the question of what individuals should do given the current state of artificial intelligence and education and employment. For students, my recommendation is clear. Do the hard work. Write your own essays even though it is difficult. Your own problems even when you are frustrated. Engage with challenging material even when it is confusing. This is how you develop cognitive capabilities that will serve you throughout your life. I understand the temptation to use artificial intelligence. Your peers are using it. It saves time and effort. You might get better grades with less work, but you are sacrificing your cognitive development for short-term convenience. The skills you fail to develop now will be increasingly valuable in the future as artificial intelligence becomes more prevalent. Your ability to think critically and solve complex problems and tolerate intellectual frustration will differentiate you from peers who took the easy path. Professionals, my recommendation is similar. Do not use artificial intelligence to do work you do not understand. Focus on developing deep expertise in your field. Read extensively. Engage with complex ideas. Build genuine understanding. Use artificial intelligence to handle routine tasks that do not require expertise, but never to replace your own thinking. The professionals who thrive in an artificial intelligence saturated world will be those with deep expertise who use these tools to amplify their capabilities. Professionals who struggle will be those who relied on artificial intelligence to compensate for lack of expertise. For parents and educators, the recommendations are more complex, but equally important. We need to create environments that encourage struggle and persistence. We need to teach students that difficulty is not a problem to be avoided, but an essential part of learning. We need to model sustained engagement with challenging tasks. We need to celebrate effort and growth, not just outcomes. This goes against much of current educational culture, which emphasizes ease and comfort and immediate results. But it is essential if we want to develop people who can function effectively in a world full of cognitive shortcuts. There is also a societal dimension to this that requires collective action rather than just individual choices. We need to have serious conversations about how artificial intelligence should be integrated into education. The current approach in many institutions is essentially unregulated use. Students use artificial intelligence however they want, and educators struggle to detect it or respond to it. This is not sustainable. Educational institutions are banning artificial intelligence entirely, which seems overly restrictive and probably futile. These tools exist and students will use them regardless of bans. But we need thoughtful policies about appropriate use. We need to redesign assessments so they measure genuine understanding rather than the ability to produce written output. We need to teach digital literacy, including critical evaluation of artificial intelligence outputs. We need to help students understand the long-term consequences of over-reliance on these tools. Employers, there is a similar need for thoughtful policies. Many companies are rushing to adopt artificial intelligence to increase productivity without considering the implications for skill development. Employees who use artificial intelligence extensively to do their work are not developing expertise. This creates a hollowing out of organizational capability. In the short term, productivity might increase. In the long term, the organization loses its depth of expertise. Companies need to think carefully about which tasks should be augmented by artificial intelligence versus which tasks employees should do themselves for developmental purposes. They need to invest in training and skill development rather than assuming artificial intelligence can replace expertise. Society more broadly, we need to recognize that this technology is fundamentally reshaping human cognition in ways that are not necessarily positive. We need research on the long-term cognitive effects of extensive artificial intelligence use. We need public education about the risks of over-reliance. We need to value and cultivate human cognitive capabilities rather than treating them as obsolete in an age of artificial intelligence. Let me return to my core message because I want to make sure it is absolutely clear. Your brain is a biological system that adapts to how you use it. When you engage in difficult cognitive work, your brain builds capacity. When you avoid difficult cognitive work and rely on artificial intelligence, your brain weakens. This is not metaphorical. This is literal physical change in neural structures and functions. The choices you make about artificial intelligence use today are shaping your cognitive capabilities for the future. If you consistently take the easy path and let artificial intelligence do your thinking, you are building a version of yourself with weak cognitive capabilities. If you do the hard work of developing genuine expertise and use artificial intelligence only to extend capabilities you already have, you are building a version of yourself with strong cognitive capabilities. These two paths lead to radically different futures. In one future, you are capable and competent and able to do difficult cognitive work. You have expertise that others value. You can evaluate and direct artificial intelligence tools effectively. You are cognitively resilient and adaptable. In the other future, you are dependent on artificial intelligence for basic cognitive tasks. You lack the expertise to evaluate whether artificial intelligence outputs are correct. You struggle with any task that requires sustained, difficult thinking. You are vulnerable to being replaced by artificial intelligence because you never developed capabilities beyond what artificial intelligence can do. Future you move toward depends on the choices you make now. Every time you face a challenging task, you have a choice. You can do the difficult work of engaging with it yourself, building your capabilities. Or you can take the shortcut of using artificial intelligence to avoid the difficulty accepting the degradation of your capabilities. These small choices accumulate over time into major differences in cognitive capability. I want to emphasize that I am not anti-technology or anti-artificial intelligence. These are powerful tools that can be used in valuable ways. Any powerful tool, they can be used well or poorly. A chainsaw is an excellent tool for cutting firewood. It is a terrible tool for surgery. The problem is not the chainsaw itself, but using it for the wrong purpose. Artificial intelligence is excellent for certain applications. It is terrible for others. Using it to avoid cognitive development is using it for the wrong purpose. The tragedy I see unfolding is that many people, especially young people, are making choices that will limit their futures without fully understanding the consequences. They see their peers using artificial intelligence and getting good grades or completing work quickly. Do not see the slow degradation of cognitive capabilities. They do not realize they are trading their future competence for present convenience. By the time the consequences become apparent, it will be much harder to remediate. Cognitive capabilities that should have been built during key developmental periods will be much harder to build later. Plea to anyone listening is to think carefully about the long-term implications of your artificial intelligence use. Do not be seduced by short-term benefits. Do not assume that because something is technologically possible, it is wise to use. Your brain is your most valuable asset. Your cognitive capabilities are what will allow you to navigate an uncertain future. Do not sacrifice them for the sake of convenience. Let me also address something that often comes up in these discussions, which is the idea that concerns about technology degrading human capabilities are nothing new. Every generation worries that new technologies will make people stupid. When people worried about this with books and newspapers and radio and television and video games and the internet. And yet humanity has survived and even thrived. Maybe concerns about artificial intelligence are just another iteration of moral panic about new technology. I think this argument deserves serious consideration, but ultimately, I do not find it convincing. Previous technologies did change how people use their brains, but they did not directly replace cognitive work in the way artificial intelligence does. Books and literacy changed how people remembered information. Before literacy, people developed exceptional memory skills because they needed to retain important information. After literacy, people could offload memory to written records. But literacy also enabled new cognitive capabilities. It allowed people to engage with complex ideas across time and space. It enabled sophisticated argumentation and knowledge accumulation. The net effect was probably cognitively positive, even though some specific abilities like rote memorization declined. Television reduced reading and changed attention spans, but it did not replace the cognitive work of understanding ideas or solving problems. The internet and search engines made information retrieval easier, but they did not do the cognitive work of synthesizing information or generating ideas. Artificial intelligence is different. It does not just change how people access information. It directly replaces cognitive work. It can write your essays and solve your problems and generate your ideas. The cognitive work that develops human capabilities can be outsourced to these systems in a way that was not possible with previous technologies. I think this genuinely is different from previous technological changes. We are at risk of creating a generation that never develops strong cognitive capabilities because they never needed to. The systems that would do that development never got the exercise they needed. Another dimension worth exploring is the impact on motivation and engagement. When you do difficult cognitive work and succeed, there is an intrinsic satisfaction that comes from that accomplishment. You feel competent. You feel proud of what you achieved. This positive feedback reinforces engagement and motivates future effort. This is part of the natural learning cycle, leads to effort, which leads to accomplishment, which leads to satisfaction, which motivates tackling the next challenge. Artificial intelligence disrupts this cycle. When you use artificial intelligence to complete a task, you might get a good result, but you do not get the satisfaction of accomplishment because you know you did not really do the work. This creates a strange psychological state. You have the external reward, the good grade or completed project, but you lack the internal sense of satisfaction. Over time, this can lead to disengagement and lack of motivation. If nothing you produce feels like your own accomplishment, why bother engaging deeply with anything? Partly explain the reports from educators about students seeming increasingly disengaged and unmotivated. If students are extensively using artificial intelligence, they are depriving themselves of the satisfaction of accomplishment, which undermines their motivation to engage with challenging work. This creates a vicious cycle. Lack of motivation leads to more artificial intelligence use, which further decreases the satisfaction of accomplishment, which further decreases motivation. Breaking out of this cycle requires consciously choosing to do difficult work, even when it is easier, not to even when you will not get external rewards for the extra effort. It requires finding intrinsic motivation in the process of learning and growing rather than just seeking external validation. Let me discuss one more dimension, which is the impact on identity and self-concept. Part of who you are is constituted by your capabilities. I am someone who can write. I am someone who can solve complex problems. I am someone who understands certain technical domains. These capabilities are not just skills you have. They are part of your identity. They shape how you see yourself and how you navigate the world. You develop genuine capabilities through difficult work. You build a robust sense of self. You know what you can do because you have done it. You have confidence in your abilities that comes from tested experience. This creates psychological resilience. You trust yourself to handle challenges because you have successfully handled challenges before. Artificial intelligence undermines this. If you use artificial intelligence to produce work you could not have produced yourself, you are left with uncertainty about your actual capabilities. You might get external validation for the work, but internally you know it was not really you who did it. This creates a fragile sense of self that is dependent on continued access to artificial intelligence. You do not trust your own capabilities because you have never really tested them. This can lead to anxiety and imposter syndrome and avoidance of situations where you might need to perform without artificial intelligence assistance. Building a strong sense of self requires doing difficult things and succeeding through your own efforts. There are no shortcuts to this. Artificial intelligence might help you produce impressive outputs, but it cannot give you the sense of capability and confidence that comes from genuine accomplishment. Is the path forward. I think we need a cultural shift in how we think about difficulty and effort and achievement. Current culture, especially in educational and professional contexts, tends to value efficiency and outcomes. Person who produces results quickly is admired. The person who struggles is seen as less capable. This creates incentives to use any available shortcut, including artificial intelligence, to produce results with minimal effort. We need to shift toward valuing growth and learning and capability development. We need to recognize that struggle and difficulty are not obstacles to overcome as quickly as possible, but essential parts of developing capabilities. We need to create environments where it is acceptable to struggle, where asking for help is encouraged, but where doing the cognitive work yourself is expected. This requires changes at multiple levels, individual choices about how to approach learning and work, educational policies about assessment and artificial intelligence use, professional cultures that value expertise development, societal conversations about the purpose of education and work. None of this will be easy. The momentum is currently in the other direction ever more extensive artificial intelligence use and ever less expectation of sustained difficult cognitive work. I believe this path leads to a future where human cognitive capabilities have degraded to the point where we are genuinely dependent on artificial intelligence for basic intellectual tasks. That is not a future I want to see. So I am advocating for a different path, one where we use these powerful tools thoughtfully to extend our capabilities while still doing the difficult work that develops those capabilities in the first place. One where we recognize that some things are worth doing the hard way because the difficulty itself is valuable. One where we cultivate human cognitive excellence rather than treating human cognition as obsolete. The choice is ours to make, both individually and collectively. I hope we choose wisely because the consequences will shape human cognition and capability for generations to come. Your mind is not something to be outsourced or automated away. It is your most precious resource. Treat it accordingly. exercise it rigorously. Build it through challenge and effort, and you will develop capabilities that no artificial intelligence can replicate, capabilities that will serve you throughout your life regardless of how technology changes, is my message. That is what I believe needs to be understood about artificial intelligence and human cognition. The tools are here. How we use them will determine whether they enhance human capability or degrade it. Choose enhancement through disciplined use rather than degradation through dependence. Your future self will thank you for the investment you make now in your cognitive development. Thank you for listening to this extended exploration of these critical issues. I hope it has given you a framework for thinking about your own artificial intelligence use and its long-term implications. The decisions you make about these tools today will shape who you become tomorrow. Make those decisions with full awareness of what is at stake. Make them with wisdom and foresight and commitment to your own cognitive flourishing. The future is being built right now through millions of individual choices about how to use these technologies. Make sure your choices are building the future you want to inhabit,